On to what's new. So we're going to do something a little bit different this month and going forward. One of our new leaders, Sekou Tyler, had a really great idea that I thought was terrific. And so he teaches at the Nashville Software School. And so he had this great idea of bringing in people who, for example, might be a student at the National Software School and give them an opportunity to present on some of the things that are new in the BI community in Nashville, and to share that with the community here. So today we're going to have a gentleman named Nick Oldham tell us about the updates to Power BI. Now, Power BI doesn't do updates in the month of December, so he's going to give us the updates for November, and I think he maybe has a demo or two for us. I think, I'm not positive, so I'm looking forward to that. I was looking at his bio that you can see here, and he has a BS in computer science and an MA in theology. So he's definitely exercising both halves of the brain there. So I mean, I bet you he's a fascinating person to have a conversation with. Anyways, Nick, take it away, sir.
Thank you, Michael. You give me way too much credit, actually. So yeah, so I am Nick Oldham. As Michael said, I started in the tech world in computer science, and then went away and did some odd and weird things. And much like a lot of my colleagues, once a techie, always a techie. So I found myself coming back to the tech world, and most recently graduated from Pivot Technology School with a concentration in data analytics, and use that really in my everyday life now. Currently, in my current role, I'm a senior safety program manager at WeGo Public Transit, and I use this Power BI tool every single day to try to track trends and stuff in the accidents that we're having around Nashville and some of the surrounding counties. My LinkedIn information was down there below. If you wanted to link up, please do so. But I am going to share my screen now. As Michael mentioned, there are several updates in the new Power BI November 2020 version. I certainly won't go through all of them. I've heard that Michael and Sekou give a tight time frame, and they start playing the Grammy music if you start going over. So I'm going to try to beat that time and not go over my time. So I'm going to share my screen here and show you. Let's see. I hope everyone can see. So I'm just going to focus in on the zoom slider, which is a new feature, and the anomaly detection, which I think is super, super cool. So obviously, I've already loaded my data into Power BI. And so here is the number of accidents over the course of all this year. What I want to do is bring in my zoom slider. So I go over here to my format pane, and I find my zoom slider. And if I turn that on, essentially it provides a way to examine a smaller range of data in the chart without having to use a filter. So if I just want to zoom in, let's say in September, so I can adjust my slide there, and it does it automatically for me. I don't have to use a filter. And the other cool thing about it is it will not affect contextual information like calculated trend lines. And if I publish this to my online Power BI service, it saves this zoom state and will load it up to my online services, which is very, very, very cool. I like that a lot. So that's the zoom slider. Oh, and there's a couple of features over here in the format pane. I can just do one axis. I can turn the zoom off for the x-axis or the y-axis, leave them both on, and do the label. So that's very, very cool. All right, so the next one is my favorite one, and I just started using this when I got the update, and I'm hooked already, and it's only been a day and a half. So this is the anomaly detection. So obviously, because it's a preview, so you have to turn this on. So if I go to File, Options, and Settings, go to Options, and then go to preview features. You have to select the anomaly detection. And then once you do that, you'll have to restart Power BI for it to be enabled. But once it is, I'm going to take that same chart, and I am going to go over to the analytics pane. And at the very bottom it says find anomalies. So then I'm going to just click the add button there, and it automatically brings up the anomalies. Wherever a value goes outside of its expected boundary, it marks it as an anomaly. And so I can literally go in and see, like, okay, so you're saying that Thursday, June 25th is an anomaly. Why? And it gives you an explanation of the anomaly, and this helps with root cause analysis. So it comes over here and says, it gives a plain definition of what the anomaly is. The count of the accident class was unexpectedly high on this particular day. The value was 4, which is above the expected range of 1 to 3. So then I can kind of drill in and look at that and say, what's happening on that day? Another really cool feature is now you don't have to select any visualization in the report field. You can just bring it over and it creates a table for you already. So I can literally come in and say, okay, I want to know who the operator was that was driving and why are they having this accident specifically on this day? What's going on? And so it's very, very, very cool. As I click through, it tells me, what the accident class was and who the operator was. And then I can start to see some trends, like this happened on a Wednesday. This anomaly picked up on a Wednesday. So now I'm starting to think like, hey, what's going on Wednesdays? So now I've contacted our operations team and said, hey, are we making any changes? Are we doing something on Wednesdays? Because we're having an abnormal amount of accidents on Wednesdays. And it's highly customizable. You can come down here and change the shape of where the anomaly, what the anomaly points out. You can change the size. You can change the color. You can change the, this is really cool, the sensitivity. So if you lower the sensitivity and apply, it picks up less of the anomalies. It's a little less sensitive, but the more sensitive it is, the more anomalies it'll pick up. So those are the two, the zoom slider and the anomaly detection in the new update in November 2020. And that is my time, Michael and Sekou. I think I beat the music.
All right, thank you very much, Nick. That's really great. That's awesome. Thank you for presenting that. May I ask, what was the secret behind Wednesday?
So this is very, very interesting. So I found out that we were having a shortage in our part-time drivers, and so our drivers that we have what's called an extra board where they pick up extra hours, and so our extra board operators were working longer hours on Wednesdays because of a shortage in part-time employees. And so those accidents were happening on Wednesdays because of driver fatigue. And so I worked with HR and asked them if they would start recruiting specifically for Wednesdays, part-time drivers for Wednesdays. Within 3 months, we had increased, no, it's only been 2 months since September. 3 months? Yeah, 3 months. So within those 3 months, we brought on 15 part-time drivers, and that's decreased the last time I ran the report.
That's excellent. So you're keeping people healthy and you're saving money.
Absolutely.
That's wonderful. So I think I made a mistake. I said that you and Sekou were connected to the Nashville Software School, but it's Pivot Tech. Is that right?
It's Pivot Tech. Really a brand new technology school, and it was phenomenal. I was literally leaving class and then going and executing the stuff we were learning in class into my actual data.
That's awesome. Excellent. Well, Sekou, I think you want to introduce our other recruiter.
Yeah, so real quick, Mary Van has a job announcement for Nashville Software School. As you can tell, I juggle a lot of things, Pivot Tech and Nashville Software School. So Mary is someone I work with at Nashville Software School. So if you want to announce your job role that you have, go for it.
Thanks, Sekou. Hey, everybody, I'm Mary Van Valkenburg. I'm the program manager for data science and data analytics at Nashville Software School, and we are hiring a full-time data analytics instructor. So if you've been making an impact as a data analyst and you want to make an impact in a different way, I'm going to say being an instructor is the best job in the world. Very rewarding. I'm going to post a link to the job description in the chat. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Mary. I appreciate that. Share my screen again. All right, so thank you, Mary. Thank you, Nick. Thanks, Chad. Thanks, Brian. There is in the bottom right of the screen, there is Nick's LinkedIn profile. So like I said, super interesting guy. So definitely connect with him if you can. So that's it for the what's new. And so this is the all the new features that came out in the month of November. And now on to the main presentation. So if you guys know anything at all about Power BI, you probably have heard of our next presenter's name. I would say that Alberto Ferrari and his partner Marco Russo wrote the book, but they've actually written several books. I have on a shelf over here the official Microsoft guide to SQL Server analysis services, and it was written by Alberto Ferrari and Marco Russo. I have their DAX guide. I need to get volume 2, which came out not too long ago. They are the experts on all things DAX and VertiPack engine, and that means Power BI and Power Pivot. I had the pleasure of seeing a couple of his presentations at SQL Saturday Austin BI. This was back in January. This was when people could still get together in person, and had wonderful conversations with him. And he's been gracious enough to come present with us today. So with that, Alberto, I will turn it over to you.
Sounds good. Let me see. Share the screen. Do you see anything?
So I see you.
You see me, but if I do that, you see something different.
Yeah, so now I see your screen with you in the top right-hand corner.
That's perfect. That's what I was expecting to see. Perfect. You already did a great job of presenting myself, so I'll keep it very, very short. We are going to talk tonight about calculation groups. This is the only slide that actually matters because there is the QR code. If you take a picture of it or if you just copy the link, there you will find the PBIX file, the slides, and all the stuff that I'm going to present tonight. With that said, just 2 words of presentation. Hi, I'm Alberto Ferrari, coming from Italy. I work with Marco Russo at SQL BI. We do a lot of stuff related to business intelligence. We basically write books, we do training, we do some sort of consulting, but mainly we teach DAX. That's what we love the most. So if you are interested in DAX at all, just go to SQL BI, read our articles, go to YouTube. The YouTube channel is our last work. I'm becoming a YouTuber like my son right now. With that said, we are going to talk about calculation groups. I'm not a big fan of slides. I prepare tons of slides all the time, and I quite never use them. So this is probably the only slide that we will see during the entire presentation. All the remaining part will be demos, demos, and demos again. Calculation groups are a new feature. Well, new is they are not new. They have been introduced in late 2019, but actually people started using them since June, July. because Microsoft decided to create calculation groups, but they did not provide any user interface to create them. So up to a few months ago, there were no way to create calculation groups. Since when we have the hardening feature in Power BI, now you can use external tools. And among the many external tools, there is Tabular Editor, which lets you create calculation groups. If you don't know what Tabular Editor is, keep in mind you should. The Tabular Editor is the tool that you need to use in order to edit your models. We are going to use Tabular Editor 2 because it's the open source version available as of today. Keep in mind, tomorrow, Daniel, the author of Tabular Editor, will present for the first time Tabular Editor 3. And just look on Twitter or somewhere because he posted the link to see the presentation. If you have not yet seen it, it's totally worth looking at. It's the best experience you can have to author any kind of DAX code. I was totally amazed when I started looking at it, and I mean, it's great. With that said, it has not yet been announced officially, so we will need to stick with 2. Let's go back to calculation group. They are available in Power BI Desktop since July. They require Tabular Editor, and the main goal of calculation group is to reduce the amount of code that you need to author. There is nothing that you can do with calculation groups that you could not do previously with different techniques. So they are not going to improve the power of the DAX language, but they make it so much easier to produce models that are usable and maintainable over time. There was the last point in the slide, which is they require some deep understanding of DAX. I always tell that to everybody. DAX is a simple language, kind of simple, but it's far from being easy. Calculation groups are part of this characteristic of DAX. They look very simple. They are very simple. They are extremely powerful, and it's incredibly easy to use them to completely break all the calculation you have in your model, because they are so powerful that it's very easy to abuse them, to use them the wrong way and not understand exactly what they are doing. I personally am scared of calculation group. Whenever I need to create multiple calculation groups, I fear them because I know that it's very easy to write code that does not work. So use them. There's nothing bad about calculation groups. They work beautifully. Just pay attention to the details, because as we will see, if you do not pay attention to details, your numbers will be off and they're really, really hard to debug. With that said, let's go to demos and start to play with calculation groups. I have here my usual Contoso model. There is nothing strange, nothing fancy about this model. It's a usual star schema. We have sales, date, customer, stores, and products. Contoso is a fictitious company that sells electronics all over the world. Imagine this is your data model. In a data model, you typically have measures, calculations. Here we have the sales quantity, the sales amount, the cost, the margin, and the margin percentage, all measures that stay there and work. Pretty soon, in your trip and your journey with DAX, you discover that you can create time intelligence calculation. You can modify calculation and create measures on top of measures. And that's exactly what we are going to do here. Let me get rid from here of some stuff. I'm only interested in quantity and sales amount. Let's say that I don't want to slice by brand. I want to slice by time. So we search for date and we put the year and also the month on the rows. And let's expand 2008. I have the sales amount, time. People typically ask, they want to see the same period last year. So if you need to author the same period, the sales in the same period last year, you solve it quite easily. You write sales same period last year, SPLY, which is equal to calculate sales amount, and then you use same period last year over date to date. That works. It's a measure that computes the sales in the same period of the previous year. Just need to format it the right way. And we also leave some space. In 2007, I don't see anything. In 2008, you see that the sales in January are the sales of January 2007. We have 794 here and the 794 here. So that's kind of easy. You have same period last year, and it's likely you will have the full previous year, the year to date. Let's create the year to date too. If you want sales YTD, that's again just a simple calculate sales amount, and then you use dates YTD over date. And now you have YTD, put it there, put a comma, and YTD performs another time intelligence calculation. The thing is, we created two measures for sales amount. And it's kind of likely that our user will start to ask, hey, I now see the YTD and the same period last year for sales. I'd like to see the same for cost. And I'd like to see the same for margin. And I'd like to see the same for margin percentage and for quantity. Every measure in my report, I want the same period last year for that measure. You roll up your sleeve and you do that. You copy the code of previous same period last year, build a new measure, and you build the cost sale period last year, where instead of calculating the sales amount, you just compute the cost amount. And that works. You can put the cost amount and everything is working fine. But you can easily start to count. We have just two variations and 5 different measures. That means we need to author 10 measures to build all the variations of all the measures. And very quickly, users will start to ask different kind of calculation. I want to see the variation in percentage against the previous year. That's another variation. Or I want to see other calculations. You can imagine how many variations you have. If you multiply the number of variations by the number of measures you have, the numbers grow at an incredible speed. To me, the really hard point is not authoring the code, is finding a name. How do I call the measure that computes the cost in the same period last year, not counting the non-working days? You end up with acronyms and life is really hard. Beside, what is really noticeable is that if you look at cost same period last year and you look at sales in the same period last year, they really look similar. They are basically the same measure, the same calculation. The only thing that changes is what I call here. This is calculate cost amount with whatever filter, and this is calculate sales amount with another filter. So it would be beautiful if we had the ability of saying, let me write a variation of my formula where I tell you, if you want to apply the year to date to whatever measure, just apply YTD, just use calculate, that whatever measure, whatever it is, embedded inside calculate dates YTD. So I treat this part as if it was a parameter of my formula that will be replaced with whatever the user puts in the report. And that's exactly what calculation group lets you do. Instead of authoring 10 measures or 5 measures for each variation, you write one variation and the engine takes care of applying the variation to all of your measures controlled by the user. Let's see how they work. Let me clean up this a bit. Let's get rid of everything and we just keep quantity and sales amount. A calculation group needs to be selected by the user. So the user needs a way to apply a calculation group and choose the variation they want. In order to let the user apply calculation groups, Microsoft decided that calculation groups are basically like tables. They are nothing but a table where each row of this table is a variation that is applied to a base measure. You cannot create calculation groups starting from Power BI. There's no user interface to do. And I have no idea if and when we will ever have a UI inside Power BI. So if you want to use to create calculation group, you need to open Tabular Editor. And with Tabular Editor, completely different user interface, but you can create a calculation group. I told you calculation group is a table. Let me zoom in a bit. Does it work? Do you see it larger? So move your head because I just see it. Perfect. Oh, I forgot to tell, if you have any question at any point, just ask. I don't mind at all being interrupted for whatever reason. So a calculation group is a table. You right click on tables, create new, and instead of creating a table, you just create a calculation group. You need to provide a name. We were talking about time intelligence, so let's call it a time calculation. And this creates a table named time calculation. Then we need to provide a name for the column in this table. This table will only have one column, and that column will be the name of the calculation group. We call it again time calculation. I'm not very creative. I always use the same name for the table and the column because that way it's easier to remember stuff. So we have a table, we have a column name. We need to start creating our variations. And to do that, you create a new calculation item. A calculation item is a variation like year to date, quarter to date, month to date, or same period last year. A lot of calculation items grouped together because business-wise they have a meaning together, they form a calculation group. So a calculation group is nothing but a container of calculation items. Okay, now we can get rid of the zoom because now we can zoom the font. And now we start to write the code, which is calculate. Here I need to put something. If you remember, it is calculate sales amount, calculate total cost, calculate sum of quantity. We don't know what to put here. It will be the measure that the user puts in the report. And there is a function to do that, which is selected measure. Selected measure is not really a function. It's like a placeholder. It's what DAX will replace with the measure that the user put in the report. So selected measure, and then with date. No, it's dates. Let's start with same period last year. This is the first one that I wrote earlier, date. So you see, this is not really a piece of code that we can execute because we don't know what measure will be executed here. But when we will place this in the report, selected measure will be replaced with whatever is in the report. I need to confirm it, go to File, Save, and look what happened here in the background. As soon as I clicked on Save, Power BI said, hey, one or more calculation groups need to be refreshed. A calculation group is a table. When you modify the content of the table, you need to reprocess it, refresh it in order for the new data to be available. You don't need to do a lot of things. Just click on this button. And you see here, we have our time calculation table that contains the time calculation group, calculation item. We can put that here. Typically, you use slicers for that. Let's also increase the size of this a bit, like twice. I forgot to name it. So let me go back. I just call it new calculation, which is not very smart. This is same period last year. Let me save it again, reprocess again, and now we have same period last year. Now, right now, look at this number. This is showing 2007, and this is the sales amount. If I click on same period last year, nothing fancy changes, but the 2007 disappear, and now I have 2008 here. Because by computing the values for the same period last year, the numbers are the same. It's only the number of the year that changes. It's not really exciting. So let's write another calculation item. Let's write the year to date. And as you can imagine, this is just calculate. Again, selected measure. But this time we use dates YTD over date. So we created two calculation items. Let me save it. Go back here, refresh. Now you see that we have two calculation items, same period last year and year to date. Look at the numbers here. When I click on year to date, instead of showing the sales amount, it's now showing the year to date of the sales amount. And not only of the sales amount, but also of sales quantity. For sales quantity, I didn't author a single measure. I never wrote the code that computes the YTD of sales quantity, but it is computed as soon as I apply the calculation item year to date to the measure that is present in the report. Okay. I can use a slicer to place a filter, or I can avoid filtering and just take this time calculation, put that on the columns, and I have the same period last year and the year to date of sales quantity and sales amount. For 2007, it's not really nice, but for 2008, I have quantity and sales amount for the previous year, and quantity and sales amount with a YTD. This removes the need to have all these measures. I can now kill the sales in the same period last year. I can kill the sales YTD because I will probably never write those measures because with a calculation group, everything is so much simpler. This is the nice part. It's easy, they are simple, and most important, they reduce by a lot the amount of DAX code that you need to write. Because if you have 100 measures and 5 variations, you write 100 measures and 5 variations. You don't have to write 500 measures to build all the possible variations. You only write the code that is really useful and meaningful. So we created a couple of time intelligence calculations. Let's go further. Let's create the growth. Now, the growth is the value of the current year minus the value of the previous year. So we can create a variable current year, which is the selected measure, whatever the selected measure is. Then we need the previous year. How do I compute the previous year? It's calculate the selected measure, same period last year. And then return current year minus previous year. That should be CY. You see that I can use selected measure multiple times in my code. Nothing prevents me from doing that. Whenever I put selected measure, that will be the measure used by the user. Confirm, save, go back, refresh. And now I can instead compute the growth. And this is telling me that both the quantity and the sales amount, they are going bad. Contoso is not in really good shape. It's a company whose sales are going down, down, down over time, but we don't care too much. It's a features company. Now that I have the growth, let me get rid from here of the time calculation. Otherwise, it's just boring. I have quantity, I have sales amount, I have the growth. It's likely we want the growth per. Why is it working? Oh, it's not working on 2007, of course. There is no growth in 2007. And that's nice. We can immediately fix that. You see that if I choose growth, in 2007, I don't see, it computes the value of the sales amount. Actually, there is no growth in 2007 because there were no sales in the previous year. So we would write to blank the value. There's no growth, we just blank it out. And one of the beautiful things about calculation groups is that you can do the test right here. You only need to do the test here if not if current year greater than 0 and the previous year greater than 0, then compute the delta. Otherwise, don't compute anything because there's no meaning in computing a growth if you don't have all the values. If I save this now, the numbers change. If I select growth, you see that 2007 now disappeared because I just removed the value and it disappeared. I had to change only one place. I didn't have to go in all of my formulas and change them. That's a behavior which I put as a common factor of all of my code. I change it in one place and it works everywhere. So the growth is nice, but we also want the growth as a percentage. We want to divide this number by the sales in the previous year to see the percentage of growth. So we can go back here and start to be funny. We can easily create a lot of calculations. Growth percentage. Let me take this code, copy it here, and also increase this space a bit. Okay. Everything is nearly the same, but I want to divide the current year minus the previous year divided by the previous year. That is the percentage of growth from the previous year. I save it. Now I have created a new calculation item. Therefore, I need to process it again. This window appears whenever you change the content of the table. That is either the name of a calculation item or a new calculation item. If you just change the formula of a calculation item, you don't need to reprocess it because this virtual table is still there. In the meantime, somebody wrote, I have two questions, but my microphone is not working. Would you create another calculation item to see present month data as well? Of course, thank you, because I totally forgot about that. How does the calculation change if a user changes the date range on the main report? Question 2 requires a bit more thinking, where question 1 requires a quick answer. Let me refresh that. Okay. We created the growth percentage, but before we show the growth percentage, look at those numbers. Right now, I'm showing the value of January 2007. If I choose the same period last year, I'm showing 2008. Basically, what happens is that if you do not select any calculation item, you obtain the value of the measure as it is. If you select one calculation item, the modification of the calculation item happens and you have the new values. You always need to build at least one calculation item that doesn't do anything, because in this way, you will always be able to put the real value and the same period last year in the same report by doing a selection. Let me show you this. Let's get rid of quantity for a moment. Let's select year to date, and then I put the time calculation here. You see that I'm showing year to date or same period last year or the growth. But what if I want to see the growth, the year to date, and I also want to see the current value? I don't see it. There's no way to say I want a column that does no modification unless you create it. You can create a new calculation item that I typically call value, that simply calls a selected measure. It doesn't do anything. Its goal is to return the measure as it is with no change. So that when I save it, reprocess, now I can show the growth, the value, the year to date, but also the current value. So I have the growth, the value, and the year to date together in the same report. That's why you quite always create one calculation item that doesn't do anything. It returns the value as it is.
A quick question, Alberto. Do you typically always create that value whenever you're creating something with calculations groups?
Sorry. Can you repeat it?
Oh, do you typically always create that value calculation for all of your stuff?
Yeah, basically
Okay.
it's quite always the first one that I create because you need it. At some point, you will need it.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Alberto, I have a question.
Yep.
So I'm sort of channeling one of my previous clients here, and she would ask me that she wants to see value to the left. Can you drag and drop those, or do you need to create a? Can you move those columns around in the table?
I really hear you very bad.
Sorry. So one of my clients would ask if you can move the value column to the left of the table.
You mean changing the order of these values?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, that's easy. That was actually what I was going to go next. Because what you need to do is just change the order. If you want value to be first, look at this. When I click on value, there is this ordinal here, which is -1. That is the default value. By default, it's -1 everywhere. And if it is -1 everywhere, Power BI DAX uses alphabetical sorting. I don't remember if alphabetical or the order in which you created them, which in both cases is totally idiot. But you can change that. You can either change the value manually or simply drag and drop. You can move it here. Now value is the first. But what actually changed is that this is no longer -1, it became 0. For same period last year, it's 1. For year to date, it's 2, and so on. So you basically use Tabular Editor, to say I want the first value, then I want the year to date, then I want the same period last year, and the two grow in percentage at the end. You save everything, go back here, refresh, and now you see that value is the first, then you have year to date, the growth, and also the order in the slicer is the order that you defined in the ordinal property. Make sense? Okay.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Hal.
Now we have the value, we have the year to date, the growth. Let's get rid of the calculation item here. I no longer want it on the columns, and I want again my quantity here. What if I want the growth? I have values. Look at the growth percentage. If you click on growth percentage, sales quantity shows 0 and the sales amount shows -0.12. Both numbers are bad because if you look at the growth, actually it's -933. So there was a variation. But if I look at the percentage, it shows 0. And also the sales amount, I don't want to see -0.17. I want to see 17%. The problem is that the number that you see here is using the format string of the measure that you put here. Quantity is an integer, therefore it doesn't have decimal places. Actually, the number is -0.17 both here and here. Here it will be a slightly different value, but around the same value. But because we have no decimal places, it shows us 0. What we want to do is to tell the engine, when you show the growth, which is using the same unit of measure of the base measure, use the format string of the base measure. I want to see this with 2 decimal places, and I want to see integers here. But when you show the growth, override the original format string and use my own, because I know that this is a percentage, so I won't compute it with my own format string. Luckily, you can do that. I'm really happy of this because it was a huge fight to have it in the first version. You have really tiny here, but you can see that you have the properties of the calculation item. There is the name, the ordinal, the expression, and you also have the format string expression. This is a really cool thing because here you can provide the format string of the calculation item that can be different than the format string of the base measure. So you can write %, and this will change the format string of growth percentage to a percentage. If I save it, go back here, and it doesn't work. I never remember how to write the percentage. Let's use 0.00%. That typically works. Save it. Okay. And it works. Now you see that sales quantity shows a percentage, sales amount shows a percentage. If I use growth, it uses the format string of the base measure. If I use growth percentage, it uses a percentage as I want. Not only you can use a constant value, but you might have noticed that I had to enclose it in double quotes. And I had to do that because this is not just a string, it's a DAX expression. You can write as the format string whatever DAX expression you might desire, which it will be computed for every cell, and that provides the format string of that specific cell. It's not very common to use format string expressions in DAX, but if you ever need them, for example, if you do currency conversion or if you need to show data with different currencies, you can put the currency name as part of the format string or unit of measure. If you need to measure length or weight, you might have the standard unit of measures or the crazy European or English or American unit of measure. So you might need to add the unit of measure to your numbers in order to make them more meaningful. And this is available only in calculation group. You cannot define format string expressions for measures. You can only do them with calculation groups. So this is the nice part of calculation groups. They work, they are easy, they provide a lot of power, and they work in a very simple way. The thing is, it will not last a long time until you start to really like them, because as soon as you create calculation groups, people start to ask more calculation groups. For example, I might say, hey, you know what? I would like to build a report like this, where I choose the calculation that happened. I want a year to date. And I also want to change the measure. I want to be able to select through a slicer whether what I'm seeing is the year to date of the sales amount, but I'd like to see the year to date of the quantity or the year to date of the cost, selecting again with a slicer the measure that I want to use. And you can do that with another calculation group. We can create a new calculation group. Let's call it matrix. I just need to move this nearer. Metric. Then we need a name, again, metric. And we create a couple of items. The first one will be sales amount. And the second one, let's call it sales cost. Now, what should I write as the calculation for sales amount? I basically don't want to use the selected measure at all, because whatever the user will put in the report, I want to replace it with sales amount. So I don't use selected measure. I just rewrite whatever the user puts in the report. And for the cost, I totally don't remember how I call the measure. I call it cost amount. Okay, so for sales cost, I use cost amount. I save it, go back, refresh. And now I have here my new metric with the metric calculation item. Let me copy the slicer so I do not need to reset all the properties. We put the metric, get rid of this. Now I can choose sales amount, nothing changes. But if I click on sales cost, this is now the sales cost, and it's the year to date of the sales cost. I can choose the growth percentage of the sales cost, and this is the growth percentage of the sales cost. It is totally idiot that you still see here sales amount, but this is the name of the measure that you originally put there. The thing is, if you ever plan to use stuff like this, what you can do is build a new measure that you call, guess what, value or whatever, which is blank. You actually don't mind what this measure returns, because whatever the measure returns will be replaced by your calculation item. So now you can get rid of the sales amount. You have value, and the value shows the sales amount or the growth and the growth percentage. Well, let's use only the growth of the sales amount or the total cost. Make sense? So actually, there are not many limits. You can make this calculation do whatever you want. They are extremely powerful. Let's put again the sales amount so we see some good values. But you need to pay attention to details because calculation groups are cool. They are powerful. They really provide a lot of power, but the users love them so much that they will ask you to create 1, 2, 3, 4, 10, 100 calculation groups. And at some point, you will start to have issues. Let's say that I like the sales amount and I like calculation groups. So I want to create a third calculation group, which I call statistics. I want to create a calculation group that performs calculations on top of my measures. I want to be able to compute not only the growth, these are time calculation, but also transform the value into a monthly average. I want to know the monthly average of the sales amount, the monthly average of the quantity, the monthly average of whatever measure I put in my report. So I can do that. I can create a new calculation group that I call statistics, and I create new calculation items. Let's say that I want the minimum, I want the max, actually monthly mean, I want the monthly max, and I also want the monthly average. So how do I compute the monthly mean? It's a min x over the values of date, month, I don't remember, how do I call that? The month, that was not that hard. Of what? Selected measure. So this returns the minimum, the monthly minimum of whatever measure I put. In a similar way, I created the monthly max, but instead of min x, that will be a max x. And the monthly average is an average x. Confirm everything, save it, refresh. Now I have the sales amount. I have my statistics calculation group here. I forgot to give it a proper name, but I can put it here. Now, month by month, average, max, and min, they produce their correct value because it's always the same value, month by month. But at the year level, monthly max produces the value of April, which is the maximum monthly sales amount. Monthly mean produces 794, the minimum of January. And monthly average is the average of all these values. Of course, this works if I put the sales amount, but also if I use the margin. Whatever measure I put there, it will be computed the correct way. And I'm happy. Let me just copy this, put it here, because I want a slicer also for the last calculation group that we created. Okay, let's select only the monthly average because we want the monthly average. And you can also compute the monthly average of the sales amount or of the sales cost. That's fine. What about the monthly average of the year to date? Let's also put the value. No, let's just keep monthly average of the year to date. Do we like these numbers? Keep in mind well, first of all, we should understand what do we mean by monthly average of the year to date. But by its definition, the monthly average is an average. So it should be a number close to the close to the amount. If I remove average and I only compute the value, you see that the values are 411, 471, 504. I would expect the monthly average of year to date to be in May, the average of January, February, March, April, and May together. So a number around 500, a bit less than 500. But the thing is, when I apply year to date, in May, I will get 2.5 millions. So whatever it is computing, it's not what I want. And the thing is, how do I understand what the hell it is computing? And second, how do I fix it? Because I don't want this number, I want a different one. Understanding the problem is easy. Accepting that it is a huge problem, it's much harder. Because we need to understand what is happening here. What is the engine computing? Keep in mind, we have selected monthly average and we selected year to date, and we are computing margin. So the calculation that we are doing is margin with year to date and monthly average, and the numbers are just wrong. What is happening here? We need to write a bit of DAX to understand that. Let me open DAX Studio so we can write some DAX. Okay. The original measure is gross margin. But then there are two calculation items which are being applied. So it will be embedded inside calculate that places a filter on the calculation item. One is for time calculation to be equal YTD. And the other will be on statistics. I used name, that was not very smart, equal monthly average. What is the engine going to do? This is the code that DAX receives. Or in other words, this is the code that Power BI sends to DAX saying, hey, the user decided to compute the sales amount, but they apply the filter on the time calculation and a filter on the monthly average. So can you please provide me a number? And DAX needs to apply the calculation items. So it goes and says, oh, I need to apply the time calculation, which is year to date. What is the definition of year to date? To discover that, I need to go to my year to date. Here it is. This is the definition of year to date. So let me copy that. And this will be the selected measure. So I take my gross margin, put it instead of the selected measure, and I have applied year to date. Then I need to perform the second operation, which is the monthly average. So this is my code right now. I go on the monthly average, take this piece of code, go here. And the real question is, what is the selected measure right now? The selected measure is the measure that you reference in your code. Selected measure is a measure. It needs to be a measure. Now, I know it looks kind of stupid doing that online, but try to repeat that with me. Selected measure needs to be a measure. If there's no measure, there's no selected measure. That's why this is my selected measure, and this is where the replacement will happen. Okay. So if I apply first dates YTD and then sorry, if I apply first the dates YTD, and second, I apply the timing, no, first the timing calculation, and only later I apply the statistics, I obtain this code. But I could have done the opposite. This is one interpretation. What if I go for the other way? That is, I start again from my calculate sales amount. And then I need to apply first the average X. So I go here, I replace sales amount with average X. And I obtain this code. Second, so the next step is I apply the dates YTD. So I go here, take year to date, take this code. Okay, and I write it this way. Okay, and I obtain this piece of code. Now, the real question for you is, did I write the same stuff? They do not compute the same value. They are completely different. This computes the value, the growth, both values of date month and gross margin, they are inside dates YTD. Here, the sales amount is inside dates YTD. Values is not. So this will compute the average X month by month, but for only the currently selected month, April, of the YTD of the sales amount. So this is basically computing the YTD of the sales amount. That's what it computes. Depending on which calculation item I apply first, I obtain a different result. And who decides which calculation item is applied first? You, the developer. You have the responsibility of choosing what the engine is going to do. The engine will never take a decision by itself. It just follows whatever you ask it to do. So we learned that we first need to apply the year to date, and then later we need to apply the average. How can we control the application of calculation items? For each calculation group, there is this property, precedence. Precedence shows 0 for time calculation, 1 for metric, and 2 for statistics. The highest value of the precedence is the one who wins. So the highest value is the first being applied. And we learned that statistics need to be applied after time calculation. So we need to go to time calculation and say, you know what, your precedence is 3. So now I have 1 for the metric, 2 for the statistics, 3 for the time calculation, meaning that time calculation will be applied first, then statistics, and finally metric, if we use all of them together. I need to save it, go back here, and look my monthly average year to date. Now it makes sense. Now I can put both the value and the year to date, putting the time calc here. Now, time calc, I want that on the columns. I have the value, the year to date, the monthly average. You see that this is the value and this is the year to date average. That makes sense. Where is the problem? Oh, somebody wrote at some point you need to choose the monthly average, but I totally forgot. I don't know when the point was. No, it's okay. Thank you. So you need to choose the order. And now, if I were to ask you, are we fine with the order of metric? Is it in the correct place or not? I don't know. And I really don't know. Right now, it is before statistics, because statistics, no, it's the last one. So the order will be time calculation, then statistics, and finally metric. Is it correct or not? I don't know. I really don't know. I would need to start trying. The problem is if you have two calculation groups, you already are a bit in trouble. You need to think a lot. If you have three calculation groups, that's sort of a nightmare because the number of possible combinations are a lot. 4 calculation groups, 5 calculation groups, and you are completely, I don't know the correct word unless it was a swearing. So you are just in trouble, okay? Because finding the correct order with 5 calculation group is a nightmare. It's so easy to make it wrong and obtain numbers that are completely stupid, completely wrong. Whenever I'm in trouble with calculation groups, what I do is exactly what we did right now. I take the code, I expand the code myself one step after the other until I obtain the full calculation. And when I have the full calculation, then I'm happy. The important point beside is expressions like this, because whenever you have a calculation group that, no, sorry, I didn't want to show you this. Whenever your calculation groups have this format, they are calculate, selected measure, and then whatever kind of filter. Everything is easy because you can combine as many as them as you want. You will face no issue. The problem is not here. Here you're just destroying whatever has been computed and replacing it with sales amount. But as soon as you start writing code which is no longer trivial, these are just 4 lines of code, but it's already troublesome because we have an iteration, we have selected measure being called here, and the application of the calculation group will not happen over the entire code, but only over the selected measure. So if you write a code that is not trivial, it is very, very easy to be in trouble because of the order of precedence. You make it wrong and you just go crazy trying to debug in them. So one of the few golden rules about calculation groups is don't build too many of them. Just stick to 1, 2, maybe 3 calculation groups. Going for the 4th is already, it's an easy way to be in trouble. So I would avoid it if possible.
A quick question, Alberto. Do you find yourself typically just using 1 or 2 for your clients' calculation groups?
Well, I'm kind of used to lie to my client. So when they ask me to build the 3rd calculation group, I can simply say, I'm sorry, Power BI does not support 3 calculation groups. And you can blame Microsoft.
Yeah.
Everybody's happy. No, I typically suggest them to reduce the usage of calculation group because it's very easy to make mistakes. Not only it's easy to make mistakes with the precedence, this is only the first false step that you can take into calculation groups. There are so many more. But there's another one that I want to show you, which is this one. You see that I have selected here value and year to date. And I see the value and I see the year to date, which is fine. No, actually, I want to show you something different. Anyway, let's go to the end of this. I started. If you select multiple calculation groups, you see that I don't see any total here. I don't see the total of these two, even though I should, because these are the same as columns in a table and these are rows in a table. So I should see the total, but I don't see it because if there are multiple values selected for a calculation group, the result is a blank. The calculation group is not applied at all. And that's the reason why if I select two calculation groups, but I don't put the calculation group on the columns, let's get rid of this. I see the monthly average because I still have the name. No, actually, they changed it lately. Yeah, you see, it is not applied. So if you have multiple calculation groups, you see the same as value, the same number. If you select one, it is applied. You see year to date or same period last year or growth. But if you select multiple ones, that goes back to the original measure, the margin. Because you cannot select multiple calculation groups. It wouldn't make sense to select multiple ones. So calculation groups are not applied when you select multiple ones. There is another scenario where calculation groups are not applied, and it is when you call the same calculation group multiple times. Look at my growth percentage. I have a calculation group that computes the same period last year. And in the growth, I compute the same expression that I compute here. So why shouldn't I be able to compute this like calculate? Instead of writing period last year, I could write time calculations. Time calculation equal SPLY. Inside a calculation item, I can call another calculation item. And the question is, first, is it supported? The quick answer is yes, it is. You can call from inside a calculation item another calculation item. If I save it, this is still likely to work. No, it does not. I messed up something. Oh, because yes, I called the same period last year. Okay. You see, it's working. If I compute the growth, it's working just fine. But what happens if I go in same period last year and for whatever reason, I apply a filter that says time calculation equal growth. Again, the question is, should it work? Well, if I call growth, growth calls same period last year. But then same period last year will call growth, which in turn will call the same period last year. And then I will go back to growth. That's what we call an infinite loop. It will never terminate because each calculation item is calling the other one. And this is not supported because, because it simply cannot go into an infinite loop. This is the reason why you can call from growth, you can call same period last year. But if in same period last year you call growth, this will be ignored. It will not execute this calculation. And it would be the same as if this code does not exist at all. Make sense? In order to implement what they call sideway recursion, you can call from one calculation item another calculation item, but that calculation item or anybody after that can no longer call the original one. You can set the calculation item only once and never again.
Alberto, I have a question about that.
Yep.
When I first used calculation groups, I did what you did in the growth, where I referenced the same period last year. But my metrics were slow when I did that. Is there some performance hit to referencing other calculation items within the same group? Is there a reason you shouldn't do it?
Let's say there is a good reason not to do them anyway. So I never use sideway recursion at all.
Okay.
And the reason is I I find it already hard to debug calculation groups when there is no sideware recursion. Adding sideware recursion adds a level of complexity to the entire calculation. And most of the time that user come to me saying, I had a problem with my calculation group. If I see sideware recursion, the first thing that I tell them is get rid of it. They rewrite the code without it. I would say that 95% of the time I never hear them anymore, because that means the problem is solved and they just are happy that way. So there might be a performance issue. I'm not aware of that. To be honest, I never use them. I just stay away from sideware cache as hell because it's dangerous. But there is another problem that you need to be very well aware of that comes from this consideration. You cannot call the same calculation item more than once. Okay, remember that. You cannot call the same calculation item more than once. What happens if your user builds their report and they call it? They create sales same period last year equal calculate sales amount where time intelligence, time calculation equals same period last year. That is going to work. There is nothing bad in this measure. I can get rid of this, get rid of that, take my measure, put it here, and this is computing the sales in the same period last year. But, and this is where you need to pay attention, by doing that, it used the only time the time calculation could ever be used in the entire chain of calculation that starts from here. So if you authored your code using time calculations, and at the same time you expose time calculation to your users, you are in danger, because if the user defines a measure that uses this single possibility of calling a calculation item, inside your code, that call will never happen, and your measures will be broken because the user authored a measure like this. So calculation groups are super cool, but they are extremely dangerous. Either you create calculation groups for users and you never use them in your code, or you create calculation groups for your code and you never expose them to your users. But never mix the two things together, because it's so incredibly easy to create calculations that are completely off and simply do not compute any good value. So all this was to reach the last slide. I have a ton of slides, but as I told you, I never use slides for calculation groups. It's so fun to do everything straight on demos. If you want to use calculation groups, do that. Performance-wise, they are not still perfect. That's important to know. They are not the fastest on the planet. But the advantage they give you in terms of maintainability of code is just gigantic. So it's definitely worth using them in order to simplify your code. You need to follow two rules to stay safe with calculation group. The first one is never use complex expression when you use a calculation item inside your code. If you call a measure and set a calculation item, keep it as simple as possible, because writing complex code makes it harder to understand. Don't use sideware recursion. Do not use any kind of recursion, because recursion is just not supported, but also sideware recursion that is theoretically supported, it's dangerous. It adds complexity to a topic that is already complex enough by itself. So there's actually no point in using any of these two. If you just follow these two rules, then calculation items are really cool. They are powerful, they are beautiful. As I say, they are not the fastest today, but there are a lot of space for improvement. So they will become faster and faster over time. And it's worth starting to use them, because your code will be able to benefit from the optimizations that Microsoft will introduce later with calculation groups. But you need to know that sometimes performance are not that good. Keep in mind, calculation groups simplify the development and management of data, they are applied and evaluated. The application is the steps that we've performed manually over the single measure in order to understand what happened. You need to pay attention to the definition of the calculation group and to the precedence. And whenever you are in doubt, and also when you are not in doubt, spend some time and do the application manually to understand what the final outcome of the calculation will be. With that said, I think, yeah, I'm already 5 minutes late, but that's totally normal for an Italian. So I'm not gonna say anything more than thank you for having attended. If you have any question, I'm still here for a while. So just turn on the microphone, write in the chat, and I'll be glad to answer.
Well, Alberto, thank you very much. I really appreciate you being with us today. Will, it says I can't share my screen. So I was just going to put up the slide just to remind everybody that the meetups for January through March are already out. We've got Megan Longoria in January.